Ever wondered why global events unfold the way they do?
Hmm.
Why some nations seem to play this long game, while others just stumble into predictable traps?
Yeah.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into one of the most foundational texts on international relations,
Hmm.
Hans J. Morgenthau's Politics Among Nations.
That's right. And our mission for you today is really to cut through the noise, extract the essential insights from this seminal work.
Right.
Think of it as a shortcut, maybe, to understanding the often unspoken rules of the international arena. It reveals why knowledge, as Morgenthau argued, is most valuable when it's understood and actually applied.
Absolutely. So we'll unpack why international politics is, well, at its core, a struggle for power,
Hmm.
and how you can tell real imperialism from just political hot air.
Yeah, that distinction is key.
And what the true art of diplomacy really looks like in this world, transformed by technology and new ideologies. Get ready to maybe shift your perspective on how the world truly operates.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's unpack this core idea that Morgenthau really champions right from the start. International politics is and always has been basically a struggle for power.
Right.
He sees this as, empirical, pragmatic, not some abstract theory.
Exactly.
But he notes that this fundamental truth is frequently denied, even by scholars, publicists,
Yeah.
statesmen.
Yeah.
Why do you think so many try to deny something so, well, seemingly foundational?
Well, it's fascinating because he identifies this pervasive fallacy, this belief that the struggle for power is just temporary, something we can, evolve past. He says many have been persuaded that the struggle for power is a temporary phenomenon ever since the Napoleonic Wars ended.
Right.
But Morgenthau insists, no, it's universal. In time and space, it's just a fact of experience.
Okay.
He highlights that power is always the immediate aim, even if nations ultimately claim they seek freedom, security, prosperity, or power itself. For him, it really boils down to national interest, what Abraham Lincoln called official duty, that overrides any personal wish or abstract moral values.
So it's about being prudent then, weighing the political consequences of actions that might seem morally right on the surface.
Precisely.
That sounds like a tough pill to swallow for some, almost cynical.
It can seem that way.
He does say that a theory based on these principles will not meet with unanimous approval because it runs counter to two trends in our culture. One that disparages power, and another that disguises or distorts the truth of politics.
Yeah, it pushes back against comfortable illusions.
It forces you to face reality, I guess, even if it's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so once we accept that power is central, how do nations actually use that power? Morgenthau clarifies one of the most misunderstood aspects, giving us a very precise definition of imperialism.
Oh, absolutely. This is critical.
He says it's not just any foreign policy aiming for more power.
No.
It's specifically a policy that aims at the overthrow of the status quo, at a reversal of the power relations.
It's exact reversal.
Can you explain that difference?
Yeah.
Why is getting it right so vital for us to understand global events?
Well, this is where clarity truly matters. He directly refutes some popular misconceptions. Like, he points out that not every foreign policy aiming at an increase in the power of a nation is necessarily a manifestation of imperialism.
Okay.
A policy seeking adjustment within the status quo or even just defending it, that's very different.
Right.
He uses the example of British foreign policy regarding its overseas possessions after the 1870s. People called it imperialistic, but he argues it was mainly about the status quo consolidating, defending the existing empire. Churchill refusing to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire in 1942. He was acting as a conservative defending the status quo, not an imperialist looking to expand.
And he also debunks that idea that capitalists are always the instigators of war, which is, a common narrative.
He does. He explicitly states that during the entire period of mature capitalism, no war, with the exception of the Boer War, was waged by major powers exclusively or even predominantly for economic objectives.
Really? So economics wasn't the main driver?
Not usually, according to him. In fact, he argues it was for the most part the middle classes who were the supporters of pacifism.
Wow. Okay.
And here's where it gets really interesting for understanding things today.
Yeah.
He highlights how misidentifying a status quo policy as imperialistic or vice versa leads to grave errors.
Like what?
The classic example he gives, the appeasement of Germany in the late 30s, mistaking Hitler's imperialism for a status quo adjustment.
Ah, I see. A fatal misreading of intentions.
Exactly.
So if everything is truly about power and nations are constantly vying for position, How do they prevent one from just dominating everyone else?
Right.
That's where Morgenthau's concept of the balance of power becomes crucial, isn't it?
Absolutely central.
It's a familiar idea, but he offers some really profound insights into how this delicate equilibrium actually functions. What are some key mechanisms he points out?
Well, it's fundamentally about preventing any single nation from achieving predominance, maintaining that equilibrium.
Oh,
He details several methods, and they often overlap. There's divide and rule, where a stronger power keeps rivals fragmented.
hmm
Then there are compensations, like the historical partitions of Poland, where territory was divided up just to maintain equilibrium among the other big players.
carting things up.
And of course, armaments, building up military strength, and alliances, forming pacts.
Alliances seem key.
They are. He gives the example of the Franco-Russian alliance of 1894, a defensive pact against the German-Austrian combination. It shows how mutual fear can drive these alliances. They might say they're maintaining the status quo,
But
but they can paradoxically contribute to general conflicts, like World War I. The very alliances meant to keep peace helped trigger the war.
the unintended consequences. And at the heart of this entire system, this constant balancing act, is the concept of sovereignty.
Yes.
We hear that word all the time, but Morgenthau really clarifies what it is, and maybe more importantly, what it isn't. What should we understand about it?
He argues sovereignty points to a simple political fact: the existence of a supreme authority to enact and enforce legal rules within that territory.
Okay, supreme authority.
But it's not freedom from legal restraint. Nations can take on lots of legal obligations, treaties, and so on without losing sovereignty,
As
as long as they don't give away the final authority over their own lawmaking to someone else.
Got it.
And crucially, he argues that divided sovereignty is logically absurd and politically unfeasible.
Meaning you can't really split it?
Right.
Right.
He uses the U.S. Civil War as the classic example of how that question gets settled, ultimately by conflict. Essentially, the power to make the final binding decision within a territory has to reside somewhere definitively, not, as he puts it, here and there at the same time.
Okay, that makes sense. So, given this view of power and the sort of absolute nature of sovereignty, what does Morgenthau say about things like international law, international courts, organizations like the League of Nations or the UN? Can they truly put constraints on this relentless struggle for power he describes? Do they have teeth?
His view is, well, quite pragmatic, let's say realistic.
Okay.
He notes that international law is a decentralized legal order. It's often vague and ambiguous, and its rules are binding only upon those nations which have consented to them.
So consent is key.
Right.
And interpretation.
Exactly. Which means nations frequently interpret and apply international law through the lens of their own national interests. He uses the example of rules of warfare, like maritime rules or treatment of prisoners. They were codified, sure, but they were regularly violated and on a mass scale by all belligerents during the Second World War.
So the law didn't hold up under pressure.
Not when core interests were at stake. He also argues that international courts tend to defend the status quo. They can't really resolve the issue upon which the power contest between the two countries has seized as one of its main stakes.
Meaning the big political fights.
Right. He cites cases like Czechoslovakia in 1938 or South Korea in 1950, where courts couldn't stop the power politics.
So what about collective security? That sounds like the ideal solution, right? Everyone banding together against an aggressor.
Yes. He calls it the supreme paradox of collective security.
Paradox. How so?
Morgenthau argues it cannot be made to work in the contemporary world, as it must work according to its ideal assumptions.
Why not?
Because it demands nations forsake national egotisms and the national policies serving them, and they generally won't.
So self-interest gets in the way of the collective good.
Pretty much. He cites the League of Nations sanctions against Italy in 1935-36 as a clear failure, and he points out even the Korean War, which started as a UN collective security action. It was transformed completely into a traditional war once China intervened. It reverted to power politics. He even suggests that functional agencies like NATO or the European communities, while they unify regionally, they can still get drawn into the unsettled political conflicts globally, rather than rising above them.
So even cooperation has its limits in this power framework.
According to Morgenthau, yes.
Now, beyond these formal structures, states, laws, organizations, Morgenthau also delves into the human elements of national power.
Mm-hmm.
What role do things like national character and morale play? Are they just fuzzy concepts, or do they actually impact a nation's strength?
Oh, he thinks they're hugely important, arguably the most important, but also the most elusive components of national power.
Elusive, huh? Hard to measure.
Very, but real. He illustrates this with the persistence of certain Russian qualities, even using this story of a century, guarding a patch where a snowdrop once grew.
A snowdrop.
Yeah, a small anecdote, but for Morgenthau, it reveals something profound about, say, adherence to duty or tradition, maybe? Or the German capacity for technological innovation leading to blitzkrieg.
Hmm.
These aren't just random, they connect to national character, he implies.
Interesting.
And morale.
National morale is directly linked to how much a people identify with their government's actions and goals, especially in foreign policy.
So public support matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this connects directly to the quality of government itself as a source of national strength. A poor government can just waste resources and demoralize its people.
Okay. And how has modern technology, especially in warfare, changed the game entirely? Because it's obviously not static.
Right. Modern technology, particularly mechanized warfare, plus advances in transport and communication, it's made war total in a really profound sense.
Total war. We hear that term a lot. What does he mean specifically?
It's no longer just armies fighting armies.
Yeah.
Modern war has indeed become war by total populations.
Everyone's involved. Yes, both as participants, maybe working in factories or supporting the effort, and as prospective victims. Civilians are on the front line in a way they weren't before. He mentions how, in past centuries, disease often killed more soldiers than combat did.
Right.
But now, losses through direct military action have increased to an enormous extent. Technology makes killing much more efficient.
That's grim.
It is, and it leads him to this really chilling thought.
Which is?
He suggests that, technologically speaking, no technological obstacle stands in the way of a worldwide empire if the ruling nation is able to keep its superiority in the technological means of domination.
Wow.
Oh.
That's unsettling. The idea that technology could enable a single global power.
It's a stark warning about unchecked technological advantage combined with the will to dominate.
Does he offer any counterbalance to that? Or just the warning? And how does this total war idea connect to what he calls nationalistic universalism?
Yeah.
He sees that as a new, dangerous kind of nationalism.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, exactly. Nationalistic universalism isn't just about wanting your own nation state. That was older nationalism.
So what is this?
It's when a nation believes its values, its system, its way of life are the only right ones, and feels it has a right, maybe even a duty, to impose them on everyone else.
Like a mission?
Precisely. It claims for one nation and one state the right to impose its own valuations and standards of action upon all the other nations.
And that changes things how?
It replaces the old moral consensus,
Yep.
the shared basic values that used to provide some restraining influence on the raw struggle for power. Foreign policies become sacred missions.
Yeah.
Power contests turn into ideological struggles between good and evil.
Which makes compromise much harder.
Almost impossible sometimes. It raises the stakes incredibly high.
Okay, so if collective security and international law have these serious limits, and war is now total and ideologically charged, which sounds terrifying, what hope does Morgenthau offer for peace? He puts a huge emphasis on diplomacy, I know, but he also points out its degeneration in modern times. What went wrong with diplomacy, in his view?
He argues that what he calls parliamentary diplomacy, these public negotiations, decision-making by majority vote, especially like in the UN General Assembly, has really harmed its effectiveness.
Why? Because it's public.
Partly. He notes that such public forums tend to transform diplomatic discussion into a propaganda match.
Oh, playing to the gallery.
Exactly. Each side just digs in, solidifies its conviction that it's absolutely right, and genuine compromise becomes nearly impossible.
And the voting.
He also stresses that the numerical relation between a minority and a two-thirds majority in the General Assembly obviously does not of necessity correspond to the actual distribution of power and interests among the members.
So the votes don't reflect real-world power.
Right. There's a disconnect, which undermines effective diplomacy based on actual capabilities and interests.
That makes perfect sense. It turns complex talks into a performance. So what's the solution then? What does good diplomacy, real statesmanship, look like for actually preserving peace in this world defined by power?
Well, Morgenthau outlines 4 essential tasks for diplomacy, real diplomacy.
Okay, what are they?
First, You have to accurately assess the other nation's objectives and their actual power. Understand them clearly, realistically, not through wishful thinking.
Know your adversary.
Yes. Second, define your own objectives strictly in terms of the national interest and, crucially, support them with adequate power. National security is the irreducible minimum here.
Be clear about your goals and have the means.
Third, and this is vital for peace, find ways to reconcile conflicting national interests through compromise on secondary issues. Focus on what's essential versus what's negotiable. He quotes Bolingbroke, urging nations to proportion the ends she proposes to her interest and her strength. Don't overreach.
Be realistic about what you can achieve.
Yeah. And finally, choose the appropriate means. Persuasion, compromise, and yes, the measured threat of force. But he warns that no diplomacy relying only upon the threat of force can claim to be both intelligent and peaceful.
So force is a tool, but not the only one.
Right. He really stresses that diplomacy needs to return to being more private, more subtle maneuvering. It needs to avoid the absolutes of victory and defeat you get in crusades or total war.
And instead?
And instead find the middle ground of negotiated compromise. That's where peace actually lies, in his view.
Wow, okay. That was a truly deep dive into the raw realities of international politics as laid out by Hans J. Morgenthau. You've seen that the world stage isn't always about shared values or high ideals,
Yeah.
but often about a relentless, sometimes disguised struggle for power.
Yeah.
And understanding this foundational truth maybe allows you to look beyond the headlines and truly grasp the motivations behind global events.
Indeed. It's a sobering perspective, isn't it? But also empowering, in a way.
How so?
It challenges us, challenges you, to look beyond the rhetoric, the official statements, and consider the underlying national interests and power dynamics that are almost always at play.
Right.
And this raises, I think, an important question for you to ponder.
Okay.
In a world where, as Morgenthau says, the truth of politics is often disguised, distorted, belittled, and embellished, how will you distinguish between genuine efforts for peace and strategic maneuvers in this enduring struggle for power?
That's a powerful thought to leave you with. Keep diving deep, stay curious, and thanks for joining us on this exploration of politics among nations.